Okay, so wanted to talk about this coming week's Torah portion. The name on it's referred to as Balak. But before we get there, I just want to give, it's not directly on point to what we're going to be discussing today, but just more for a general perspective of the Torah and the narrative that we have and that we read every year. So the Torah that we take out of the Ark is the 5 books of Moses, and then the Torah in the larger sense. So some people will refer to Torah as the 5 books of Moses, but there's also Torah in a larger sense refers to the books of prophets or refers to the books of writing. Good morning, Roberta. So it's a broader context. So in the Torah that we have, in the 5 books of Moses, what you have is it's all about direction, about mitzvahs. The idea of Torah is it's definitely, I've mentioned it, I'm sure, numerous times. It's not a history book, but it is framed in a chronological narrative, in a historical narrative. So the first book of the Torah takes us a little bit over 2,000 years from Adam and Eve up to the Jewish journey to Egypt. It's about 2,000 years, first 2,000 years of civilization as we see it. And then once the Jews get into Egypt, the clock slows down quite a bit, because we have is the Jews are in Egypt. We really don't have much about the Jews being in Egypt, but we know from when the liberation begins, which is at the very beginning of the second book of the Torah. That, just to give you some historical context, that's the year 2448 on the Jewish calendar. And well, it was 2447, and then they leave in 2448. For the entire second book of the Torah, starting from there, and the third book of the Torah, and the very beginning of the fourth book of the Torah, all take place within, let's call it, 2 years from when they leave Egypt. It's a very narrow slice of time, and we've discussed numerous times. They go to Sinai 7 weeks later, and they stay in Sinai for about a year, and that takes us really through to the fourth book of the Torah already. So if they're going to be spending 40 years in the desert, we only have about a year and a half of that history. So we have the episode with the spies, the tragic episode of the spies, Moses sending the spies, and the spies coming back, 10 of the spies coming back to repudiate the land, and the Jews complaining they don't want the land. That happened this time of year after the first anniversary of the Exodus. So it's a year and let's call it a year and a half. It's not even a year and a half after the Exodus. The story of Korah, which was the rebellion led, and that was in the last week's Torah portion. That is, let's say the week before this. So 2 weeks ago, Torah portion. That happened shortly after that. So up until what we read yesterday in the Torah, the Jews are basically still within a year and a half after leaving Egypt. We know there's going to be 40 years. We don't have it. In what we read yesterday in the Torah, we go from the year 2449 to the year 2487. So we jump for about 38 years. And we have nothing of that. We have no Torah indication of what went on in the Egypt, in the desert for those 38 years. Because the Torah only selects episodes that are meant for our direction for posterity. So even though we have some in the Medrash and we have some inferences later when Moses, before he passes away, a little bit, generally, we just don't have it. So yesterday's Torah portion, we jumped from what we read yesterday in the synagogues around the world. We jumped from a year and a half into the desert journey to the deaths of Miriam and Aaron's siblings, which was all within 12 months of actually leaving the desert and going into Israel. Just for that, conceptually or chronologically, for the framing of how much we have and how much we don't have of the Torah historical narrative. So now that the Torah has fast forwarded us 38 years to the end of the journey in the desert, and it also, just for our context, I hope I'm not I'm sticking with you here. The fifth book of the Torah is all going to be about Moses in the last 5 weeks of his life, doing a reprise with the people. So the historical part of it is going to end with the end of the fourth book of the Torah, pretty much. And we're heading towards that. So now, for these final Torah portions, and we are in the last few Torah portions of the fourth book of the Torah, we're talking about within the last even 6 months or so of the Torahs of the Jewish journey in the desert. So one of the things that we have, Torah tells us that the Jews, when they left Egypt, dislike of the unlike is a human thing. Anti-Semitism is also just, it seems to be baked into, and the Talmud really kind of refers to it as kind of baked into humanity. Not that every person who's not Jewish is an anti-Semite, but that anti-Semitism is out there, and it's just there until the era of Moshiach. So there is, the Torah talks about a non-Jewish spiritualist, and his name was Bilam, and he's given a lot of credibility Torah-wise. In other words, he was not a charlatan. He had really, naturally, some very strong spiritual powers, and he's approached by the king of Midian. There are different tribes that are really are bent on destroying these Jews who have been wandering the desert for 39 years. And one is named Moab, and one's Midian. And so since nothing seems to be working, the king of Midian hires Balak, this anti-Semitic prophet, to try to curse the Jewish people. And there's it's really all pretty much all one narrative in this coming week's Torah portion about this saga. And the crux of it is that as much as he tries to curse the Jewish people, God intervenes and takes control of the reins, of the joystick, and as he opens his mouth, he utters not curses but blessings. So we have a bunch of our blessings coming out of this anti-Semite's mouth, and they are profound blessings. And one of them we say every morning. If anyone's familiar, remembers Ma Tovu Ohalecha Yaakov Mishkanatecha Yisrael. That's a quote from Bilam. It's how goodly are your tents, and your dwelling places, Jacob. We quote him every day in our prayers. I think pretty much universally, at the very beginning of our morning prayers. It's because it's not about him as the medium, but it's divine blessing. Now, so what I selected to look at today is something that we find towards the end of the Torah portion. Bilam tries 3 times to curse the Jewish people, and he just can't get it out, because when he opens his mouth, as I said, instead of curses coming out, he has blessings coming out. One of the things he talks about there, he seems to refer to, is the end of days. End of days, it means when the world turns for the good. This has been a Jewish, and not it's been across the spectrum, because I think most religions borrow from Judaism. This idea of a utopian messianic end of days, where finally the world comes to it's a better place. The world shows its innate godly potential. This is referred to by Bilam. So I want to bring up the just for a minute here, and bring up let me do a split screen, share screen, sorry. Okay, so this is number one is from this is Bilam being quoted, and he says, "Come, I will advise you," and he's talking to his his co-conspirator, whose name is Balak, what this people will do at the end of days. And Nachmanides here writes, and it's pretty obvious, it brings it from the Talmud, this refers to the era of the Messiah. He's saying what's going to be at the end of the days, there's a Messiah. A star, and this is his quote, a star has gone forth from Jacob. A staff will arise from Israel, which will crush the princes of Moab and uproot all the sons of Seth. Okay, so before we go any further, so you have here a legitimate prophecy coming from a guy who's a shmendrik, but he does. Let's put that to the side. This is a legitimate prophecy. It's a Torah prophecy. It's going to be read in the Torah all over the world every year. And he says, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen to the Jewish people who have suffered through history. He'll tell you at the times of Moshiach, the end of days. And he says that star will arise. In other words, there will be ascendancy. And then it finishes off, and I'll go back to the verse soon, that God will, and it's used as harsh language, for those who are not Jewish. There's different languages for either different tribes or the non-Jewish people. So this touches on, and I was struggling with what to put as a title for this, because you got to be careful with what you put in writing. This touches on a very sensitive topic, I think, for any person of faith, of any faith. Although I'm not claiming to know what every faith in the world believes. But the idea is that if we believe that this is a correct way, and if you're a person of faith, it seems to be that will be probably your way, that this is, I believe in this. Ergo, what my neighbor believes fervently, if I believe that my way is correct, and the two are not compatible, then I believe that person is incorrect. So even if we can, and Judaism believes, certainly is fundamentally, Judaism believes that the most important thing for the nations of the world, for the non-Jewish world, is to believe in God and there are 7 laws of Noah, and they don't have to become Jewish, and we don't encourage it, because they can be fulfilled people as non-Jews. But at the end of the day, the Baptist church across the street, and I love the people there, really. I mean, the leadership there is great to us, and we work with them. But I don't accept their position on Jesus. I don't, and they know that, and they don't accept my positions. And we learn to get past it. But now, in a world of truth, now Moshiach has come. What's going to happen? What's going to happen with those who are not on what we consider the divine correct track? So this language can be troublesome, frankly, just between us, especially thinking as we are in a frame of mind that is a tolerant, inclusive, and hopefully very mutually respectful mindset, which we do. Like I just told you about my feelings about the Baptists across the street. What happens to them, and how do we deal with some of this language? When you take a look, let's go back to it. It says, the staff will arise from Israel, which will crush the princes of Moab and uproot all the sons of Seth. Now, the princes of Moab, you could say that is, that's maybe just for some reason that tribe is going to get, in times of Moshiach, is going to get crushed. Sons of Seth is really actually a general term for the nations of the world, what we call Goyim. Goyim means nations. So what's going to happen to what does that mean? My non-Jewish friends. So, which is obviously got to be careful with this language. So here, Onkelos, who is the primary translator of the Torah from Talmudic times into Aramaic, he's saying a staff will arise from Israel, which will guide the nations. In other words, how this crush is an English translation of a word that is kind of vague in the Hebrew. So I took this off of Chabad.org, and they use crush. Most translations do use a word like crush. Onkelos actually is guiding the nations, which is much more benign. But Rabbi Avram and Ezra, I'm sorry, I got a bunch of typos in here. crushing. This means that Moab will be obliterated. So, if that's the case, you have Aram Ibn Ezra was one of the greats, the medieval greats, and he's translating this. Is we're right, they're wrong. Mashiach has come, they're gone. It seems to be that that's what he's saying, and he's not the only one. And there are even I was thinking about bringing different Talmudic debates, but I didn't think it was going to translate well. That position seems to be a position. It's not the only position, but it's a troubling position. Not a troubling as a person, as an American who sees the beauty of acceptance and tolerance. But if there's something that I feel is it's a Torah value, I've got to adapt my feelings. But it's troublesome Torah wise too. And let's take a look at that. If you look at verse 6, number 6, it's from Isaiah. Isaiah describes the end of days, Mashiach's time. And he says, it should be at the end of days, that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be firmly established at the top of the mountains, and it shall be raised above the hills, and all the nations shall stream to it. All the nations. It's goyim. It's clearly that it means the Gentile world. And it doesn't say they're going anywhere. They're coming to the Lord's house. That's what Isaiah says. And many people shall go, and they shall say, come, let's go to the Lord's mount, to the house of the God of Jacob, and let him teach us of his ways. So it doesn't say that anyone's getting crushed or obliterated. It's saying that there will be, what they're going to do is say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this element. And therefore, now that it's a world of truth and there's no longer this concealment, I also want to understand where my place in God's world, and to see how I can live through the eyes of the Torah. Further on in Isaiah, similarly, it says, I have come to gather all the nations and the tongues, and they shall come and they shall see my glory, and they shall recount my glory among the nations. So it seems that this is not so simple. Even for there to be a Talmudic, rabbis of the Talmud are great, a Talmudic opinion which contradicts Isaiah, that doesn't work, because Isaiah is a prophet. What Isaiah says is scriptural. So the very idea, we want to try to understand the words. What was Bilam saying? Bilam's words are in the Torah. Bilam's words can be translated, aren't being translated by some, as the scepter, and the star of Jacob rises, and then there's this crushing of those who don't believe like us. But that doesn't seem to fit in. It doesn't say of the wicked. It says of the people. How does that work? And what does this mean? And what is it that we believe? So I want to take this a step further in history to see how Jewish law looks at it. And let's look to Maimonides. So Maimonides writes, he has what's called laws of kings, and it is functionally, it's about how the kings function in the times of Israel. But then it goes into, and this is the last section of his 14 volumes of Jewish law, is about this, and is about also about Moshiach and about better days. So he writes there, if a king will arise from the house of David, who diligently contemplates the Torah, and it observes its mitzvot as prescribed by the written law and the oral law, and will influence all of Israel to walk in the way of the Torah, we may with assurance consider it Moshiach. This is what Maimonides is saying. If you want to know, this is Maimonides. It's a book of law. It's not a book of thoughts and philosophy. He's saying, how are we going to know? We're sitting on a Zoom. There's a Jewish leader. We say, Rabbi, how do we assess whether this person is Moshiach? The person's having a lot of prominence. Maybe this is Moshiach. So he says, here's a litmus test. Here's a framework. This you can consider, not be certain, but you can consider if a person does these things, is devoted to Torah, influences Israel to walk in the way of the Torah, we may with assurance consider him Mashiach. If he succeeds in the above, builds the temple in its place, gathers the rest of Israel, then he's definitely the Moshiach. Then Maimonides says, then you're done. You're good. He will then improve the entire world, motivating all the nations to serve God together. As Scripture states, I will transform the peoples to a purer language that they all will call upon the name of God and serve him with one purpose. So Maimonides doesn't seem to leave any room for this idea that Mashiach has come. Now we know the truth. We know, yes, lighting Shabbos candles and eating matzah and Pesach and all of that is all cosmic and it's beautiful and this is the way of life. And what about those who don't believe that? All he says is that they will come together. And one of Mashiach's jobs is to motivate the nations to serve together. He's supposed to bring us together, not obliterate people. And he goes further. Do not presume that in the Messianic age, any facet of the world's nature will change. Rather, the world will continue according to its pattern. This is not universal, but this is Maimonides. Even within Maimonides, that's a whole subject to itself. How much he meant this to cover, how much time he meant this to cover, but he definitely says, at least in the beginning of the Messianic age, it's going to be a normal world. There's going to be a ShopRite and traffic lights, but what's going to happen? They said the world will continue according to its pattern. Although Isaiah states the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leper will dine with the young goat, which is not natural. These words are a metaphor and a parable. The interpretation of the prophecies is as follows. Israel will dwell securely together with the wicked Gentiles who are likened to wolf and a leopard. We have people who want to kill us, right? So we and the Iranian regime, we're going to be able to, we will sit together peacefully. Now, that's something of a miracle, but it's within the realm of nature. They will all return to the truth faith and no longer steal or destroy, rather they will be at peace with Israel. So that's what he's saying, that really that it's what the sign of Moshiach is not that all of a sudden the streets are paved with gold. He's saying that there's going to be this genuine sense of universal fraternity and peace and an understanding, an acceptance of the idea of monotheism as through the eyes of Torah. And to go one further, as he writes right before he gets into Mashiach, and if you think Maimonides lived in a time when it was very difficult to be Jewish, and he specifically was suffering more from the Muslim community, but it was not easy to be a Jew, and he lived in a time where universally, if non-Jews were leaving you alone, you didn't start conversations with them because you just hoped they would let you live. He writes something kind of revolutionary, even though it's not. He says, Moses gave the Torah and mitzvahs as an inheritance to Israel. By the same regard, Moses was commanded by the Almighty to compel all the inhabitants of the world to accept the commandments given to Noah's descendants. So this is something that we've probably discussed, or I've mentioned before. When I was a teenager, 1983, the Rabbi came out with this campaign for us to remind and encourage the non-Jewish world to believe in God. And he didn't mean to bring them to shul, to synagogue. He meant to encourage them to go to their mosques and their churches, which was in the collective, I would say, collective Jewish mindset. It was bizarre. Why are you starting up with the goyim? You be a Jew and just leave them alone. They're leaving us alone. That's good. And the Rebbe spoke about it, and the Rebbe said that this is something that goes back to Maimonides. This was not his innovation. Maimonides didn't invent it himself. It went back to Sinai. What he's saying is that unfortunately, for millennia, there was no way for us to influence the non-Jewish world because there was such terrible oppression, anti-Semitism. We didn't have a voice. And again, for our own lives' sake, for our own security, the best thing was try to keep your eyes down and keep walking and not try to influence a non-Jew to go to church, especially if the churches are telling them to kill you. But in the principle of things, this is the idea that non-Jews accept God, believe in God, and monotheism. So in a way, that means even more Islam. Because they don't have a Trinity. This is something that it is our responsibility. I'll go back to it a second. He's saying to compel all the inhabitants of the world to accept the commandments given to Noah's descendants. Now, compel, I would call it influence, but I should have tweaked that. But the point is that it's all of us. This, what Maimonides is telling us, is that if your non-Jewish neighbor comes and to hang out today, have a lemonade on your porch, and it talks about life, and you say, you know something, I had a Torah class today, and they say, cool, what did you do? That you study? I really don't. I don't go to my church too much, or I don't go to my mosque too much. And if you say, well, God is God, and God's for everyone, why don't you give it a shot? And your friend says, you know something, next Sunday I'm going to try, or next Friday I'm going to try. You've done your job. You've done a good thing, Torah-wise, to be able to encourage God consciousness. That's what Maimonides is saying. Now, what Maimonides is saying there also is what telling us is that the idea, and he brings this into the whole Moshiach idea. He's not this. It becomes clear from Maimonides that the Gentile world, the non-Jewish world, and where each of our non-Jewish neighbors and our non-Jewish fellow humans who are not our neighbors around the world, where they stand with regard to God consciousness and a connection with God, is an important issue. It's an important issue for us as Jews, and it's an important issue for God. So it becomes that much more difficult to understand, to look at an interpretation of what Bilam says in this week, of this idea of that now when Moshiach comes and now truth is out there and the Torah is real, then what happens to them? To talk about the non-Jewish world as somehow disappearing because now truth is there, it flies in the face of what Isaiah wrote, and it's certainly not something that Maimonides is hinting at in any way. Let's take this a little further. So here brought just I could have done this more in the beginning. I guess it probably would have made more sense in the beginning. There's a book from a verse from Zechariah, which really underscores the question. It says, it shall come to pass throughout all the land, says the Lord, 2 parts of them shall be cut off. They shall perish, and the third shall remain therein. So he's giving more of a fire and brimstone view of what's Moshiach, but he doesn't say who the them is, and that's subject to interpretation. And the third shall remain therein. And I will bring the third in fire, and I will refine them as one refines silver, and I will test them as one tests gold. Okay, so this is a little bit more fire and brimstone. But one of the things he said is that the 1/3 is going to survive. Who's the 1/3? It says the Medrash in 12. And who is the 1/3? This is Israel. So it sounds like similar to what some of those other interpretations were doing. That this is something that we're talking about the times of Mashiach. The Mashiach is coming for the Jews, and it's going to be a Jewish experience, and the other one's gone. So the Rebbe in 13 translated a piece of this. He said, yes, how can anyone opine that the entire Gentile world will be wiped out in the Messianic era? Even the Medrash there. The Torah tells us that God is good and his mercies extend to all his creations. Right? My Christian or atheist or Muslim neighbor is also one of God's creations. So am I when I'm looking forward to Mashiach, what am I looking forward to for them? Are they going to be wiped out? That's my good God? Even though we find instances in the Torah of God wiping out portions of humanity, like the flood of Noah, that happened because the Torah was full of corruption, because the earth was full of corruption. This messianic prophecy doesn't seem to be addressing wickedness, but a people as a whole, the Gentile world. So what of the good and pious Gentiles? At the advent of the Messiah, a time of divine revelation when all of humanity will recognize God, how can there be such destruction? The Torah must be teaching that Gentiles will continue to populate the world in the Messianic era. The differences of how to interpret the verses reflect the difference of opinion as to the state of Gentiles in the Messianic era. So let's just stop this for a second. First of all, there's an idea, and it'll come up again. He said the good and the pious Gentiles. You might say to yourself, well, good and pious Gentiles, only a few of them. The 7 Noahide laws are to believe in God, not to blaspheme God, not to steal, not to kill, not to commit sexual immorality, not to be cruel to animals, and to establish courts of justice. So there isn't all these ritual hoops for them to jump through. And the Rebbe many times would refer to the United States. In Hebrew, it's a malchus shel chesed. He would call it a kingdom of kindness. And it's pretty clear to me that the Rebbe saw this country, by and large, as a country of good and pious Gentiles. What does that mean? It means that they're accepting. This is, and it sounds more bizarre in the very fractious environment we're living in right now, but this is a country that has faith in God on its currency, and how you define God will be separated, but faith in something higher in general. Obviously, that's a very general statement, but has kindness and tolerance as a value, and has shown that to the Jewish people specifically, but it's to everyone, I hope. So, talking about the idea of a good and pious Gentile, I would assume that the non-Jews on your block fit that bill. If they're not killing, murdering, trying to kill you, they're just trying to live good lives and help create a good society. So good and pious Gentiles is a very broad word for today. It was different in the 1400s, fine. But today, we seem to fit, the non-Jewish world seems to fit the bill overwhelmingly, and I believe that Rebbe indicated that in the way he used to speak, because he was speaking about America, but I think he was speaking about largely the non-Jewish world. Even the church is much more accepting and supportive of the Jewish people, who they used to persecute. So, what is the Rebbe asking here? What is it saying? He's saying that the question, the different opinions that we find about the state of the non-Jewish world is really about what's the status going to be of the Gentile world. Moshiach comes, and Moshiach, and just in general, and we'll go back into the text in a minute. Moshiach comes today, and now. So the one way of looking at it is to say that now, my gosh, people, recognize that this is the way it is, that there's been this, different opinions for millennia, and now we understand that this is the truth of what God wanted, and is wonderful, and we all live in peace. So the primary thrust, we're told, of what God wanted in his deep desire in creating the world in the beginning, the primary thrust was that there be mitzvahs done. Why God wanted that we can understand, but this is that there be mitzvahs done. Whose job is it primarily to do the mitzvahs? That's a Jewish thing. We have 613 mitzvahs, and the non-Jewish world has 7 mitzvahs, and that is to help create a good society. So you might say, so we say, okay, so now the mitzvahs take center stage, the Jews take center stage, and the Gentile world is a part of it because they're part of the good society we're living in. Or you could say that actually Mashiach is coming not only for the Jews, but it's coming for the non-Jewish world. Yes, it's about Torah, but the non-Jew understanding, the Gentile understanding their own personal relationship with God, not just as support staff, as a support society for the Jewish world, but that they matter to God as Gentiles, and for their place in the world. They're not Jewish, but they're valuable. So the way that Rebbe is reading it offers is that this idea of obliteration, it's not an obliteration of people. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work that way with Isaiah. It doesn't with different verses. It doesn't work that way with Maimonides. Clearly doesn't go that direction. Saying it's that the individual status of the non-Jewish world will fade because now it's all about Jews at center stage because it's about mitzvahs. That's one opinion. Or the other opinion is that no, it's that the Jews will have what we haven't. Certainly, we've been at a central focal point in the doing of the mitzvahs, but my non-Jewish neighbors are going to have their place in this beauty of a world of tranquility and messianic reality, not only as my neighbor who's peaceful with me and good to me and my family, but because he and she, my neighbors as themselves, are going to have the messianic experience because they matter unto themselves. So let's take a little bit of this a little further. Is there any questions? Okay. So here I brought to, and I guess the sequencing could have been a little bit better, so I apologize for that. It brought from, it says, there's a very famous verse in Deuteronomy, which is the Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. That's 14. What is Rashi, the primary commentator of the Torah? What does he tell us on that? It's such a powerful verse. It's in our mezuzahs. We say it twice a day. It's a big deal. What does he choose to write as an interpretation of this verse? He writes, the Lord who is now our God and not the God of the other nations, he will be declared in the future the one God. That's the Lord is one, even though our God, we can't say that there's oneness as far as, in other words, unanimity in recognizing God as we do. That will happen. As it is said, for then I will convert the peoples to a pure language that all of them call in the name of the Lord. And it is said, on that day the Lord on that day will the Lord be one and his name one. So Rashi on the Shema, which we say twice a day, what he's telling us is, as we're saying the Shema, the idea is that there will be a time when there is unanimity, there's oneness between us and our Gentile neighbors in sharing a perspective of the existence of God. The Shema itself, this central verse, piece of Torah thinking, Rashi interprets that the idea of saying that, yes, now there's fracture, but to focus on the idea that there will be unanimity even within the Gentile world. And if we go further, later on in Deuteronomy, the verse says, the Lord your God will bring back your exiles and he will have mercy upon you. Moses is telling the Jewish people before he passes away that they're going to go into exile, and then God will bring back your exiles and have mercy on you. That seems to be pretty straight up. But Rashi there says we find this idea, the idea of redeeming the exiles, also regarding the ingathering of exiles from other nations. As the verse says, and I will bring back the exiles at Moab. So Rashi is talking about, it's as much as he suffered from the Crusades. And his grandchildren, he lived in very difficult times, 11th century in France, so it was nuts. But here he's looking through a Torah lens, and he's saying that what is the Shema, the oneness of the Shema, sitting there in France, to recognize that one day he'll be able to be together with his Christian neighbors, and they will have a oneness of perspective of God and a connection to God. He as a Jew and his neighbor as a non-Jew. And later on, what he's saying is that even this idea of ingathering of the exiles and redeeming people from a difficult life situation, which is what we have now, we look at it and we say, well, God, when we pray, it sounds like God, we're asking God to redeem us. Rashi says it's redeem us, redeem the world. Everybody matters. So let me just go a little further. I brought this from 18 from the Talmud. The Talmud is talking here. It's focusing on a verse that is by the splitting of the sea. And in the splitting of the sea, where the Egyptians, the evil Egyptians who have been abusing the Jews for centuries, they're now chasing, the Jews are out, and now they're chasing the Jews. The sea splits, and the Jews go through, and ultimately, when the Egyptians come in chasing them, the split ceases. In other words, the waters come crashing together, and they drown the Egyptians. Then there's a verse, there's a song, it's called, which we say every day in our prayers, called Azayashir, a song of Moses and the Jewish people, and Miriam of the Jewish people, when they had their salvation at the sea. One of the verses there is, the one came not near the other all night, which is it's not clear. What is the meaning of that which is written one came not near the other all night? Does that mean the Jews and the Egyptians? Who is that? So the Talmud says, actually, it's not talking about humans. Ministering angels wanted to sing their song. For the angels will sing songs to each other. And now they're looking at the world and they're seeing, oh my gosh, how beautiful that God has saved the Jewish people and punished the wicked. Let's sing. But God said, the work of my hands, the Egyptians are drowning at sea, and you wish to sing songs? This is a profound Talmudic insight. Think about, and we're not living with the horrible persecution that our ancestors lived with. There's still anti-Semitism out there, but we're not living with that craziness. But think about that. People who lived in times of Khmelnytsky in the World War II, and they're saying, and they're hoping for the downfall of these terrible anti-Semitic brutes, these evil people. And that's okay. But God says, the Egyptians, who are they are a paragon of human cruelty. So they're drowning. And it's not, God's not saying, I wish they weren't drowning. Who do you think had them drown? God brought the waters together. But there's human suffering going on. Take your salvation, but don't sing. Don't celebrate the human suffering. Even when it comes to these evil people. How much more so when you talk about people who are benign, at least, if not supportive, who are pativ, who are not trying to hurt people. So there is this great sensitivity to the idea that of the value of each individual person, Jew and non-Jew, even someone who has really proven themselves to be not behaving properly. They've besmirched, they've damaged their own potential. They've besmirched their own soul. So I say, a non-Jew like that, say, so at least let obliterate him. Take Ahmadinejad or some other anti-Semite. I don't have so much rachmanus on him. Let God obliterate. And the Torah says, you know something? We should ask for salvation from the Ahmadinejads of the world. That's good, and however it takes. But we shouldn't hope for their individual suffering, because just humanly they're created by God. So if you look at 19, this is also from the Rabbi. This helps us understand the verse in Zechariah. The opinion who believes it refers to obliteration, or that was in the one from Bilam also, is referring to the Gentile identity being overwhelmed and thus subsumed by the Jewish experience in that era. the individual identity of Gentiles will become nullified because now it's going to be all about Jews. That's one perspective. It's going to be all about Jews, and the Gentiles will be there. And if they care about them, we'll be together. They're going to be a supportive, peaceful society. But really, it's all focused on us. The second opinion believes God is effecting a distinct liberation for the non-Jewish world and in their elevation as human beings. The second opinion is that no, this is Moshiach is for non-Jews too. It's not all about Jews and then the supporting cast. It's for humanity. Now, Jews definitely take up a big space because we've been doing mitzvahs all these years, and that was central to the purpose of creation. But that doesn't mean that my non-Jewish neighbor doesn't matter to God, and that my non-Jewish neighbor his or her relationship with God doesn't matter, and that's not an important achievement of the Messianic era. And here we brought 20 and 21 from Maimonides again. In that era, there will be neither famine nor war, envy or competition, for good will flow in abundance, and all the delights will be freely available as dust. The occupation of the entire world will be solely to know God. Maimonides, this is pretty much towards the end of his book, how he ends his book, of laws, 14 volumes, and he says we live in a society where there's no longer human suffering, there's no more famine, there's no more war, there's no more discord between us, there's no more fraction, there's no more fighting in the Republicans and Democrats. There's a oneness of humanity, and all the delights will be freely available to us, which is it already starts to get a little bit more miraculous. But here's his bottom line. The occupation of the entire world will be solely to know God. The entire world, it says. So the Mashiach idea that we're praying for, that I'm praying for 3 times a day, that the Jewish world prays for, is not that it's that the truth of Judaism's place show itself. That's part of it. But the truth of reality show itself. That's for me and for my Catholic neighbor. 1 second, someone asked something, and I'm sorry, I don't know, I may have missed this before. So Rashi says those not identifying as Jews will renounce, for example, Jesus as leader, son of God, and become Jewish, and accept Hashem as God, or will people live their lives and not be anti-Semitic with the Jewish people? Yeah, that's a great clarifying question. Thank you. The idea, it's never my job to disparage my Christianity or Islam or anything like that. But yes, if the core of Christianity is monotheism, belief in God, and the core of Islam is the belief in God, and we can talk about other religions too, with the shining of truth, they will recognize that Jesus was Jewish and he took his angle on things, but that the truth of Torah is beyond him. It wasn't even him, it was Paul more, if we trust the New Testament, but somebody came along to tinker with Torah, and they say that wasn't that's not the Torah we're talking about. The Torah, the truth would be that my Baptist friends across the street can continue to pray over there, but they're praying directly to God and connected with God and recognize that God cares about them, and they no longer need a Jesus medium if they think so now. And similarly, my Muslim friends. So I hope that answered your question. And Maimonides says also, anyone who accepts upon himself the fulfillment of these 7 mitzvahs and is precise in their observance is considered one of the pious among the Gentiles and will merit a share in the world to come. Maimonides takes it even further. What happens if someone passes away today? So we believe in that the soul doesn't die, it doesn't disappear, and they go, we call it Gan Eden, Garden of Eden, paradise, however you want to describe it. What happens to my non-Jewish friends? They live good lives. Where do they go? What happens to them? Do their souls disappear? Maimonides says, no, they don't. They also have a share of eternity. Before Moshiach comes, right now, there are many, many, many non-Jewish souls existing and benefiting the beauty of a connection with God, having lived a good human life that wasn't Jewish. before Moshiach comes. How much more so than Moshiach does come? So it's really it's a perspective on how do we see our neighbors, our non-Jewish neighbors, if we really believe in God. If we say, listen, all this, it doesn't really matter. So okay, fine. So then it's all just labels. But if we really do buy this, so okay, if this is really true, then what about someone who's into something that's not true? So what happens to them? And what Maimonides says is they don't have to. My friends across the street, let them believe in Jesus. That's fine. If they believe in God and they abide by the 7 Noahide laws, which they do at least in principle, and I think in practice, they're good. And now, pre-Messiah, they have a piece of eternity, and Moshiach comes for them too, as non-Jews. So that is, as I think you can appreciate, it's a little bit of a touchy topic, I would think, to be able to get into this, because we don't want to denigrate people, other people in our society, and I hope we didn't. But I thought it was worth it to tackle it head on, to see, is it just us as open-minded and tolerant 21st century people, citizens of the world, who are now like looking past in inherent bias within a religion, which you think probably every religion has some of that? Or is it that, no, actually, by the book, without any of our overlay, that's what Torah believes. Torah believes that my non-Jewish neighbor, your non-Jewish neighbor, matters to God, created by God, and how they live matters to God. And that means as they pass on, they're not lost. And in the times of Moshiach, they have their own experience of Moshiach, not just as helping me, helping you. But that's the world we look ahead to. So leave it over there.
Mendy, I have a question.
Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
What's very confusing is I love the idea that everybody gets along. I mean, how wonderful that would be. However, we as humans have the Yetzer Hara.
Right.
So
Yetzer Hara means a negative inclination.
So
instinct.
If we've always had that, where does that Yetzer Hara go? I'm talking about my own Yetzer Hara. Where does that Yetzer Hara go when Mashiach comes? I mean, that's how we were created.
Right. So that's a great question. And I guess I should have brought that up before. One of the things Isaiah tells us is that, quoting God, God says that I will remove the spirit of impurity from the earth. And that tells us that in the times, once Moshiach comes, there's no longer that negative inclination. We will no longer have that negative pull within ourselves, the jealousy, the friction, and our neighbors won't have that either. So we're going to get along, because the poison in society comes from us, all of us, and from our personalities. And if that instinct is now suspended, so we only have our good instincts, we'll get along. And we'll figure out even how to have different opinions and still get along.
Mendy, I have a question.
Sure.
Throughout my life, meeting people that were not Jewish, some blatantly anti-Semitic, and others who would come to, for lack of a better word, cure me of my Judaism and discuss with me how I'm doomed or slated to go to hell because I won't accept Jesus. And that to me, that belief, that has bothered me more than, and don't get me wrong, I think blatant anti-Semitism and things that people are doing now and did before is almost more insidious, because they're coming to me as an individual and telling me that my life is not of quality or piousness or however they're doing it. And that's what bothers me. And that's what, so I guess
I'm with you, Susan. I mean, it's a reality. I remember speaking with a young lady. It's 25 years ago. She's probably not so young anymore, but it's when I was young. But a Jewish lady who was going to church every week because she said she found a loving God in church. And I was having a conversation with her. I wasn't trying to cure her. Actually, I told her that I'm not trying to fix you. But I said, so I don't understand. From a Jewish perspective, your friends in the Presbyterian Church are doing great. But from a Christian perspective, from your Presbyterian perspective, what happens to me? Let's say you think I'm wrong. I think I'm wrong. I was raised by a rabbi. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm just going, I believe in something. I'm trying to help the world. And because I don't accept Jesus as my savior, I'm going to be damned for eternity. And you call that a loving God? Like, where do you get that? And she was very uncomfortable. She said, I have a problem with it too. It's just, that's loving God?
right. Okay. And she had no answer.
No. Which was good. I want to plant these questions. I don't know what she's up to now, but it boggles my mind. That's what you call loving God? I didn't hurt anybody. I'm living an innocent life as an observant Jew. You say I'm wrong? Okay. So I'm not right. So damned for eternity? That's what your God needs to get revenge on me for eternity?
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. But even trying to have that discussion, there is no discussion because the position becomes you're just
forget about that one. You're not winning that one. Don't
exactly.
Don't even waste your breath. No.
And that bothers me even more because then it's more people thinking that they're not anti-Semitic or not accepting of Judaism, and that's.
I just think you're going to hell. That's all. Otherwise, I love you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay. Have a good one. Good
Enjoy.
week. Be well. Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.